All right. Hey, David, welcome to today's episode.
Thank you, Eric. Hey,
We've been trying for quite a while to get in touch with each other, and we finally made this happen.
yes, last week was a rather interesting week for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So anyway, I've been, visiting your website, learning quite a bit about nootropics, right? Is it nootropics or nootropics?
That's a good question. I call it nootropics.
Nootropics, okay.
Some guys pronounce it nootropics.
Okay.
Some guys pronounce it nootropic, and I figure that it's not worth arguing about.
There you go.
I'm the expert. I'm the authority, so I say nootropics. So that's what it's going to be.
Nootropics it is. Nootropics it is. So can you share with our listeners and viewers how you got interested in nootropics and how they became part of your life?
That's a good question. I was diagnosed adult ADD about 12 years ago. But prior to that, all of my adult life, I had been in various executive positions. And every time a performance review would come around, the annual performance review, the boss would sit me down, the CEO or whoever it was, and I was a fantastic manager. I was great in everything, marketing, sales, but you got to learn how to focus. And so I bought the books and I did everything I could possibly think of to try to learn how to focus. I thought it was a moral failing or something. And then about 12 years ago, my new wife had met a psychiatrist in Palm Beach, and she saw what was going on. And she says, I want you to meet this guy. So I went up to Palm Beach and sat down in this guy's office, and within 10 minutes, he diagnosed me adult ADD and PTSD.
All right.
And the PTSD, it took me about 10 years to figure out where I think that may have come from. But the adult ADD was, so he put me on Ritalin. And it was like somebody turned the lights on in my head. It was a miracle. And that was really the first time in my life that I had ever thought about my brain.
Right.
You know, and
most of us are worried about our heart and worried about our cholesterol.
Everything else, but you don't think about what's between your ears. So that was now something of interest to me. So I learned how Ritalin worked. And within a couple of years, I was starting to build up a tolerance to it. And I didn't want to take any more, but it wasn't working as well. So I decided to look to find out exactly how methylphenidate worked in my brain, and discovered that it worked on dopamine. And it was a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And so, but it felt like the way things were going, there wasn't enough dopamine in my brain. So the next step was, well, how do I get more dopamine in my brain? So I did a little bit of research and discovered that it was L-tyrosine. And so I got some NALT, N-acetyl L-tyrosine, and I learned about Alcar, acetyl L-carnitine, which is helps the brain signaling, and things got back on track. And I went, oh, okay, this works.
and completely off the Ritalin. So a lot of people, they're on Ritalin, amphetamine, these other medications for ADHD, but they can suppress appetite, cause heart palpitations, cause trouble sleeping, right?
It works for some people and it doesn't work for some people.
Right.
I'm still using Ritalin because I actually did an experiment a couple of years ago. I wanted to see if I could manage adult ADD strictly with dietary supplements. And I went an entire year just using nootropics, and it worked.
Gotcha.
But what I am doing in building this business, there's so much on my plate that I decided that, all right, I'm going to have to bite the bullet. I'm going to have to go back on Ritalin again. So I'm using a combination of nootropics and Ritalin, and it's working fine for me. I'm not worried about brain damage. I have no other side effects. But the message there is, obviously, if somebody is ADD or ADHD and they want to manage it naturally, it's absolutely possible to do for most people.
Right. So you bring up a good point though too. So there are a lot of people who are on prescription medications. They work very well, but again, maybe it doesn't provide them with everything that they need. They don't necessarily need to go up to a higher dose because they're worried about side effects. Are there any side effects that they need to be worried about when they add the nootropics to the prescription medications?
Well, you got to be careful there. It depends. There are some nootropics that you can't use with if you're on SSRIs, for example.
Okay.
So I've written, gosh, I don't know, about 90 or 95 different dietary supplements that affect the brain that I consider nootropics. And on every single one of them, I've got a section called side effects and the contraindications with certain medications. The ones that I'm using, like N-acetyl-L-tyrosine, they don't interact with anything unless you use too much. Acetyl-L-carnitine, no real interactions, again, unless you use too much. Everybody really has to find their own balance, right, and what works for them. We have recommended dosages based on clinical studies and personal experience, and suggest that if somebody's brand new to this and they're just starting out, start with the lowest recommended dose and see how you feel, and then work from there. I use a lot more, and I don't experience any side effects for the amount that I use. If somebody else was using the same amount of NALT that I'm using, they might end up with things like heart palpitations and high blood pressure and irritability, because dopamine turns into norepinephrine, and that's what too much N-acetyl-L-tyrosine or L-tyrosine does, is it eventually converts into norepinephrine. I don't have that problem, but the next person might.
I think you bring up a good point too, that there's, each of us have unique biochemistry, individuality. So what, you may be able to take in respect to the L-carnitine, the L-tyrosine, you may need a higher amount, or one person might need a higher amount than another just because their body needs to absorb it more, or just doesn't process it the same way.
Yep.
So everybody has kind of that unique biochemistry, and I always tell, that's one of the problems with medications, or let me rephrase that, with the FDA recommended minimal allowance for vitamins. One person might need 60 milligrams of vitamin C, but another person, because of their metabolism or their stressors in life, might need 1,000 milligrams a day. And I think L-carnitine, which is important for mitochondrial health, is that same type of thing, that if your mitochondria perhaps need to be optimized or not working as well as the next person's, then you may need higher amounts of L-carnitine in order for that to function.
Well, that's true. My wife is a classic example. I can give her almost any supplement. I can give her something like a choline supplement, and she has a really, really bad reaction to it. So it really is individual.
Right. Now, every morning when Americans wake up, or people around the world, we all consume a nootropic and we don't even realize it, and it's a xanthine, right? Coffee.
Well, the first thing we do is coffee, and then when we eat our eggs, we're getting our choline.
Right. So a lot of people, so again, these are nutritional supplements that are already out there. They're in our food, but again, we're targeting them more specifically to try to help get optimal amounts for specific conditions that we're trying to treat, correct?
Correct. Absolutely right.
Now,
in an ideal world, world, we would get all of this from food.
Right.
And I mean, this goes right down to multivitamins. I say, and this is from my own personal experience and everything that loads and loads of research that I've done, it is impossible to get as much the exact nutrients that your body needs every single day just by your food.
Right.
And there's a number of reasons for it. One of them is an apple today has about 1/8 of the nutrients that it had 50 years ago. Yeah, that's just one example. Right. We've got soil depletion. We've got transport, and a lot of nutrients are lost during transport. We've got processed, even when you cook food, fresh food, a lot of the nutrients are cooked out of it. And then the air that we breathe has got twice the amount of carbon dioxide as it did 100 years ago, which means that the plants are growing a lot faster and they haven't got time to suck up or get the nutrients from the soil that it normally would. Things as basic as things like zinc.
Right. Yeah, I've heard it said that the Egyptians used to pray that the Nile would flood because their farmlands would be covered with silt, and the vitamins and minerals would replenish the farmlands. And our farmers pray that it doesn't rain and flood because we lose billions of dollars.
Sure.
And absolutely, absolutely, the nutrients don't just come out of nowhere; they have to be replenished in the.
It really does. Well, iodine is another good example. I don't know what percentage of the world population is deficient in iodine. People that live near the coast and tend to eat a little bit more seafood tend to have enough iodine in their body. People that live inland are iodine deficient because they're not getting it from their food.
Now, are minerals considered nootropics too? Because iodine obviously is real important for brain health and optimal memory.
I consider them nootropics. The term nootropic is relatively new. It was coined by a guy named Dr. Corneliu Gurgea, who was the guy that developed Racetams back in like 1963. He came up with the name nootropic in 1972. And he got it from the Greek nou for mind, and trypan for to bend, so to bend the mind. And so he gave a very specific definition of what he thought a nootropic was. Things like enhances memory and the ability to learn, assists brain function under disruptive conditions, and that kind of thing. So now we essentially call nootropics any class of substances that improve brain function. And so that includes vitamins and minerals.
Gotcha. So it's not
to my mind.
Synthetic.
Most of them are not synthetic. Most of them are absolutely natural.
Now, a lot of physicians are familiar with Modfanil, which is used for people with sleep shift disorder. I've heard of pilots getting it so that they can stay alert. It doesn't stimulate an individual, but allows them to simply be alert. And prescription-wise, it's frequently not covered because I've prescribed it for patients before, or even patients with obstructive sleep apnea who are in the process of getting titrated with their CPAP machine. They wake up tired. So I've prescribed it before. It's frequently not covered by insurance, or we have to do a prior authorization. It can cost anywhere from $300 to $900 a month for this medication. Alternative, which is a precursor to Modfanil. Adrafanil, is that correct? Or
Adrafanil, yeah, there's a few of them that are kind of like derivatives of Modfanil.
Right.
It's interesting that you bring up Modfanil. I wouldn't consider that a nootropic.
Okay.
And the reason why is because really experienced biohackers make the distinction between nootropics and smart drugs. And I would consider Modfanil a smart drug. A nootropic is something that you don't need a prescription for.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right? You can buy it in the open market. You can get it at your local vitamin shop or at Whole Foods or at your farm. Some of them are available on your pharmacy shelves. But if you need a prescription for it, to my mind, it ain't a nootropic.
Gotcha. Now, you brought up a term that some of our listeners may not be familiar with, a biohacker. Can you explain what that means?
Well, it's kind of like what we were talking about. It's somebody that is using something in addition to the food that they consume daily to help alter their body chemistry one way or another with dietary supplements. That's basically a biohacker. If you get right down to it, somebody that takes an aspirin for a headache is a biohacker. It's just when you put something in your body that's not food,
right,
you're a biohacker.
Gotcha. Different nootropics do you take? What, there are top 5 that you take with you. I mean, what's the?
It depends on where I'm going.
Okay.
If I'm not traveling that far, if it's within country, I usually take a separate carry-on, and it's got a basket of supplements in it.
Right.
If I was going overseas and I was concerned about the import regulations, then I would take the very basics like N-acetyl-L-tyrosine. I would take Alcar. I would take DHEA, coconut oil, my multivitamins,
Sure.
a B complex supplement. So.
Are there certain ones then that, so you brought up a good point. If we travel overseas, go to Europe or South America, are there certain ones that are not allowed or perhaps even illegal in other countries that are legal here?
Some of them are illegal and they'll be confiscated at the border. If you go in certain places in Europe, for example, alpha GPC is a prescription drug. Vinpocetine is a prescription drug, and here you can get those on Amazon.
Gotcha.
And so I wrote a post a while ago called "Are Nootropics Legal in Your Country?" And I've got a list of countries on there and what I was able to find of what is restricted in what country. So it depends on where you're going.
Okay, and we'll put a link in the show description to that blog post. Now, there's different subgroups of people that benefit from these. What would you recommend for students, for example, for someone who's studying, maybe throughout the semester, trying to have optimal memory?
Sure. I would, for the average student that is reasonably healthy, is more concentrated, more concerned about learning and memory than anything else, I think.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
And recall.
Yeah. So whatever you're studying, be able to recall it whenever you need to. I've came up with a short stack for students that I expand on at great length in a post called Best Nootropics for Learning and Memory. And in that stack, I've got CDP choline, DHA, which is an omega-3, phosphatidylserine, which is part of the lipids in your brain cells, pine bark extract for blood flow, PQQ for mitochondria, and vitamins B1, B9, and B12, which are all necessary to synthesize neurotransmitters.
Gotcha. Now, do these come in supplements where all the different substances are in one, or do they need to be taken separately?
That's a good question. There are more and more companies now jumping on board, particularly in the last couple of years. They're looking at this market and it's exploding more than any other part of the dietary supplement market. So everybody's coming up with a nootropic stack. So it's really up to the individual to search out something that they think is going to work for them. I usually recommend to somebody who's new to this that rather than go through the headache of trying to find a stack that's got these specific supplements in it, start by figuring out what you want to fix or what you want to boost or what you want to correct, and find the supplement or the nootropic that is going to help that particular thing. And you're probably going to have 2 or 3 different things that you're going to want to work on. So you get 2 or 3 different supplements or 4 different supplements. And then as you gain more, you figure out what it is, how much of it ideally you need to be taking to help you. And then as you gain more experience, then you start looking for a stack, what we call a stack, which is just basically a group of supplements taken together that come in one bottle in 1 or 2 capsules a day. So when you're starting out, I recommend starting out with individual supplements to address particular things. Okay. And then as you gain more experience, start looking out for something that's ready-made. Right. Because it's less expensive doing it that way.
Sure. So basically kind of each person has to kind of test themselves and figure out what works best for them.
They really do. The thing is if you get a nootropic stack that has got what I just described in it, and you're low in dopamine, there is nothing in that stack that I just described that raises dopamine. So you might try that stack and go, that doesn't work. Okay, nootropics aren't for me. Well, the problem with that is you didn't correct the original problem. It's not that nootropics aren't for you. You haven't figured out what specifically you need to help you in your situation.
Right. Are we getting to a point where blood tests, do you think? I mean, I know testing for neurotransmitters can be expensive. A lot of times it's not covered. Are there any? Real
Well,
blood
the
test.
thing, I actually wrote a post on that too. The best lab tests for neurohackers.
Right.
The problem with testing for neurotransmitters is it's kind of useless
Right.
because some neurotransmitters are produced in your gut, like serotonin, and others are produced within the cells in your brain, so they never make it into your bloodstream. So if you do a blood test, if it shows that you're low in dopamine, for example, that might not be true because you've got plenty of dopamine in your brain already because your brain is doing what it's supposed to. There are things that you should test for and can get tested for, things like vitamin D that a lot of people are low on, things like iodine, things like iron. So it depends on your health status. But I did write a post on if this, then do that when it comes to lab tests.
Right. Let me go back to the vitamin D. So I started doing vitamin D testing here in Southern California back in 2007. Right. And I remember, first off, I'm in Southern California, so definitely we get 300 days of sunshine as you do in Florida.
Yeah.
And when you start, as a doctor, I'm telling my colleagues, I said, hey, I'm checking for vitamin D deficiency. Look, this person is low. And they looked at me like I was crazy. Right. And then slowly but surely, I was noticing certain patient populations, like with fibromyalgia and autoimmune diseases, they tended to be low. And I would bring a stack of lab results to the meetings and say, look at all these patients, they're vitamin D deficient. And I ended up writing a book on vitamin D deficiency, or vitamin D, and the importance of it. And sure enough, about 80% of the population in Southern California, where I practice, is deficient, and even more, worldwide and throughout the country. And then iodine as well. I started researching and listening to some lectures by David Brownstein, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
And on iodine deficiency. So of course you look up hypothyroidism, goiters, thyroid nodules. The number one cause worldwide is iodine deficiency, but nobody, a few people, I should say, in the United States, including the specialist for thyroids, ever check iodine levels. And I did a little bit more research, and about 10 to 12% of the American population is actually deficient in iodine when we use the World Health Organization levels for iodine deficiency. Yep. So, including my own daughter was deficient in iodine, right? And we have a pretty well-balanced diet. So again, and its importance in brain health and memory and grades and all that stuff too. So again, people with or without thyroid issues should consider at least a urine iodine test. Because these are things that can easily be fixed with a multivitamin, which has about 150 micrograms, most of them, of iodine.
Well, I think that everybody can get away with taking 150 micrograms of iodine every day without getting into trouble. Right. If you take iodine as a classic example, your thyroid, I'm hypothyroid. And I was diagnosed hypothyroid about 6 years ago, severely hypothyroid, like all of a sudden. Don't know why, but it happened. Thyroid is T4 and T3, basically. T4 converts into T3. T4 has got 4 iodine molecules and T3 has got 3 iodine molecules. You can't make a thyroid hormone without iodine.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
10% of the U.S. population is deficient.
And there's probably a lot of people that are hypothyroid and they're sick. They don't feel well, but they don't know.
Right.
Yeah. And there's nobody to tell them.
Exactly. Or they're doing a very limited test. They're just checking maybe a TSH. Again, in my daughter's case, her TSH was normal, but her T3, which is the active hormone, was deficient. So her TSH was normal. So if I would have just tested that, we would have said she was normal. And her T4 was on the low end of normal and her T3 was low. So in the absence of iodine, she was not making enough T3, which is why she had all the classic symptoms of an underactive thyroid, even though the classic TSH test was perfectly normal.
And you know how many endocrinologists I've fired? I still have not found an endocrinologist that I can work with.
Right.
Because every single one of the ones that I met and that I ultimately fired, they rely on the TSH.
Yeah, and that's it.
And I finally found a naturopath in North Miami Beach that was willing to work with me, and he does testing he just ignores TSH.
Right.
You test for free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and some of the antibodies too.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Now let's talk about another reason people may take nootropics, and that would be anxiety and depression. Which ones would you recommend, or which ones should a person avoid because they may worsen symptoms?
That's kind of a loaded question, because of what causes depression, and the same thing for anxiety.
Sure.
I wrote 2 separate posts on one for depression and one for anxiety. The thing about depression is that depression could be caused by any number of things, and it is very likely not a problem with serotonin.
Right.
It could be problems with neurogenesis in your brain. It could be a problem with other neurotransmitters other than serotonin. It could be a problem with prescription medications. It could be related to stress and cortisol. This post that I wrote takes a person through step by step how to look at yourself and the symptoms that you're experiencing and going, oh, okay, it might be that. Let me try that. So, for example, if it's neurotransmitters, you might not want to use something that boosts serotonin. You might need something that boosts dopamine, or you might need something that boosts acetylcholine, or you might need something that boosts GABA or norepinephrine. It depends on your symptoms. And then stress is another one, is if you don't take care of the underlying stress, you're probably going to have a problem keeping depression under control. So for stress, I recommend things like aniracetam, which works with dopamine D2 and D3 receptors, Bacopa monnieri, which is an adaptogen that has been shown to be as effective as some benzos, coenzyme Q10, which works in your mitochondria for energy, ginkgo fibromyalgia, chronic pain. So while I was trying to figure out how to fix those things, I changed my diet. So I eliminated all of the processed foods, or as many processed foods as I could, and started eating more basic, right. Like meat and potatoes and vegetables and salads, and you know what I mean?
Right, trying to restore your gut microbiome too. A lot of the conditions that you mentioned can be present when one's digestive system is not in optimal shape.
Well, the thing is that serotonin, most of it is produced in your gut, not in your brain. And it somehow gets to your brain and does its magic. But they've been finding too that GABA is like that as well. Probably the vagus nerve is somehow involved in with that transport. But a good probiotic, or even better, a good prebiotic, to help support the probiotics that are already naturally in your gut and start restoring gut health. And you possibly could find that your mood will improve just by doing that.
It's almost to a degree where, to me, taking a holistic approach or an integrative approach to a health problem is almost common sense, because we've, again, since, we've been working on the magic bullet theory ever since penicillin was discovered, and people now have the expectation that there's going to be a single pharmaceutical or a single chemical that's going to wipe away all of one's problems. It's like a symphony. We have to make sure every piece of it is working optimally in order for the whole musical, the whole sound to be beautiful. Otherwise, if we just focus on one thing at a time, we're really missing the boat and going to do ourselves a disservice.
I've said repeatedly that there's no one pill solution. Right. When it comes to nootropics, because I find that I've got tens and tens of thousands of people coming to Nootropics Expert and go, is there one thing that will help me? And my response is, chances are no. It's going to take 4 or 5 things. You need to figure out what they are. Right. But there's one thing is not going to fix your problem. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, there's definitely a paradigm shift, I think, going on. And I see that more with a lot of the medical students that I teach and physician PA students and so on, that they are looking at things more holistically as opposed to a pill solution. So I think there's hope for us.
There certainly is hope.
And is that taken like on an as needed basis? Is it taken as a daily supplement, or how is it best taken for anxiety?
Most of these nootropics are needed. You need to take them daily. Okay. Bacopa, for example, is something that might work right away for somebody, but somebody else might need to take it for 2 or 3 weeks before they have enough in their system for it to start producing the kind of results that they're looking for. And there's not really any right dosage for something like Bacopa either. The recommended dosage for was something with 45% bacosides is 200 to 450 milligrams per day, with 20% bacosides, 750 milligrams per day. But is that right for you? Right. But don't expect to take it once and figure that you'll feel better. So chances are that you're going to need to take it every single day for as long as you need to, and it might be the rest of your life.
Now, Bacopa also plays a role in prevention of Alzheimer's and dementia, and this is based on Dr. Dale Bredesen out of UCLA, my alma mater for my undergrad. And Dr. Bredesen wrote a book called The End of Alzheimer's. And in that, he takes, again, a very holistic approach. So he talks about the need to exercise, get adequate sleep, a low processed carbohydrate diet. He recommends Bacopa. He recommends B12. He recommends turmeric, which is also a nootropic. Mm-hmm. So what medication or what nootropics do you recommend for those who have a family history of Alzheimer's disease, or who are worried that they may be having the early signs and symptoms of dementia and Alzheimer's disease?
Funny you should ask that. I'm writing a review right now on saffron, which is, it crossed my radar a few months ago because I was doing a review of an eye supplement that had a little bit of saffron in it. And then I started going into, I visit the vitamin shop and the vitamin shelves in pharmacies often to see what's there. And I started seeing saffron on the shelf along with other brain supplements. Which
is that the same as turmeric? Is that the same as turmeric?
Mm-mm.
No? Okay.
No. Saffron is the pistil from Crocus sativa, which is a flower that grows in Iran. They've been using for 4,000 years. And the pistil is that crimson thing that comes out of the flower. Mm-hmm. It's a cooking spice. It's the most expensive spice in the world. Mm. But they found that they did a couple of clinical studies where they're comparing using 30 milligrams per day of saffron with or 15 milligrams per day of donazepam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Aricept.
Right.
Equally as effective.
Wow.
Which I thought was really interesting. I'll have that published within the next 3 days or so. Pine bark extract is another one that has been used for treating dementia and Alzheimer's. There are a couple more that help prevent the aggregation of the platelets and tau. and I'm trying to remember what they are, and I can't think of it right off the top of my head.
Okay.
All you need to do is go to a nootropics expert and search for Alzheimer's and see what turns up, and you'll see everything that turns up that helps. But Alzheimer's, there's a number of different ways that they're treating it. They find that people with Alzheimer's are low in acetylcholine. So using something like CDP choline or alpha GPC to boost acetylcholine seems to help people with dementia and Alzheimer's as well. People with Alzheimer's have also been shown to have not enough blood flow in their brain, particularly in certain parts of their brain. So boosting blood flow is really important. So you can use vinpocetine for that, or you can use pine bark extract for that. So getting rid of the platelets, the proteins that clump up,
the amyloid beta protein.
Amyloid beta and tau is only one of the problems when it comes to Alzheimer's. You got to take kind of a multifaceted approach. Again, there's no one pill solution.
Right.
And then depression is another problem with Alzheimer's, and they're trying to treat them with SSRIs. And we know what the problems are with SSRIs.
Right.
Often they don't even work. You can instead use something else that works like an SSRI that helps boost serotonin and possibly norepinephrine.
Mm-hmm.
Something like tryptophan is an easy one.
Right.
Because it's a precursor to 5-HTP, although you got to be careful with 5-HTP because you can take too much of it really, really easy and get into trouble.
Especially if you're on a SSRI. You could,
if you're on SSRIs, you do
syndrome.
not want to mess around with something that directly boosts serotonin.
Right.
Like you want to avoid 5-HTP and you want to avoid St. John's wort.
Right. What about, I have chronic fatigue is a big issue. And again, the causes are multiple. They can be, depression, it can be sleep apnea, or simply now there's a lot of talk about mitochondrial dysfunction where the mitochondria just are not making ATP, which is the molecule of energy.
Yep.
What would you recommend for somebody with chronic fatigue that they've not found a good cause for?
I would start with the fundamentals. And that is work on your cells. You get your primary source of energy is from mitochondria, and the ATP is the fuel source for mitochondria. So what you need to do is keep your mitochondria healthy and make more mitochondria if you can, and you can do that very easily with things like CoQ10. CoQ10 and combined with PQQ help not only support the production of ATP in your mitochondria, which is where your energy comes from, but PQQ is also it's the only supplement that's been found to actually multiply mitochondria. So you can take a combination of those. Acetyl-L-carnitine is another great one because acetyl-L-carnitine, I was using it and am using it primarily because it helps in the synthesis of acetylcholine, but acetyl-L-carnitine also helps transport long-chain fatty acids across cell membranes. So it helps transport the long-chain fatty acids across cell membranes to provide the raw source for fuel in those cells, but it also helps transport out the used stuff and the byproducts, so that it helps get rid of the bad stuff. Acetyl-L-carnitine, R-lipoic acid is another good one, or alpha-lipoic acid. It's something that naturally occurs in your body. It's a cofactor in mitochondrial enzymes that are involved in carbohydrate energy production. R-lipoic acid helps increase acetylcholine through a bit of a complicated process that I won't try to describe here. But if a person with chronic fatigue tried putting those 4 supplements together, along with a really good multivitamin, So I would try a combination of those four. And then if you were still experiencing chronic fatigue, then I would start taking a look at things like dopamine. And see if you're low in dopamine, and you might want to try boosting that and see if that helps.
Right.
Those are the basics.
Now, do you where do you recommend a person go to purchase their supplements, their nootropics?
I wrote a post on that too, because it's getting more and more difficult to do that. Not only because there's the selection is so huge that it can get overwhelming just standing in front of the vitamin shelf.
Right.
But you want to look for the major manufacturers that have shown that they test the raw materials coming into their plant. They test it during production, and they test encapsulated products before they ship it. And you want to see if they can prove that. Now, you might surprise yourself. Nature's Way, for example, is one of the more affordable brands of supplements. They test the heck out of their product.
Right.
But there are a number of well-known supplement manufacturers that do test their products. And the other thing to look for is make sure there's no additives. This is a classic problem with multivitamins. But you take a look at something else. If you want to get, I make my own N-acetyl L-tyrosine capsules because oftentimes you'll go and to a 500 milligram of NALT, and they've got something like magnesium dioxide or something in it. And they add some of these additives they use as filler, but some of these additives they use for to help the stuff flow easier through machinery when they're encapsulating this stuff. But it's toxic to your body. Now there are a few, and this really depends on the supplement too. You got to be careful, because you'll find that one really a supplement manufacturer that's got a really good reputation for putting out quality product can have two products that are similar. One will have additives in it for some reason, and the other one will just be pure with nothing else in it.
Right.
Once you find a manufacturer that you trust, like I work with a manufacturer in England called OptiNutra, and they make MindLab Pro, and they've got a new line of supplements called Performance Lab. They don't put anything else in their capsules except for the ingredients that's on the label. Like nothing else. And that's ideally what you're looking for. Sure.
Now, do you have any plans of coming out with your own line of supplements? Because that would make it easier.
I don't. It would cost so much money, and it's so time consuming to do that I just like working with companies like OptiNutra.
Right.
And a couple of other ones that have got the cash to do it,
right?
Have got the experience, and it's a complex process putting something like that together to produce dietary supplements.
Absolutely. Now, let me ask you another question too about the class of nootropics, Racetams. What can you tell me about that and variation between the different ones?
Oh, the very first one is called piracetam, and that was invented by Dr. Corneliu Gurghiu back in 1963. And there have been, I don't know, probably a couple of dozen offshoots since then. I use one called aniracetam, which is a derivative of piracetam. You've also got, let me see. There's oxiracetam, nephiracetam, phenylpiracetam, which has been banned by the International Olympic Committee. Those are the ones that come off that I can think of right off the top of my head. So each one works in a slightly different way. And each one of these things were first developed by one of the big pharmaceutical companies because they wanted to get in on trying to solve something like Alzheimer's. And when it didn't, and they couldn't make any money on it. They just released it into the wild. So now you can get it in the United States anyway as a supplement. Actually, they're not called dietary supplements in the United States, the Racetams. It's illegal to refer to them as a dietary supplement because, well, I won't go into the legal reasons. They're called research compounds.
Okay.
So chances are that you probably won't be able to find most of them on Amazon. You'll have to go to a separate vendor. But there are a handful of well-known vendors online that you can get things like oxiracetam and phenylpiracetam, and you're getting what the real thing.
And the racetams are primarily for cognitive optimization and memory improvement. Is that their main function? Memory
improvement. I use aniracetam for depression. Primarily, that's the reason why I started using it. Phenylpiracetam is good for energy. Oxiracetam is good for energy and for learning and memory. Aniracetam helps in that regard a little bit too, but those other ones are more suited for that. Piracetam, which is the oldest nootropic, that's excellent for learning and memory.
Okay.
You just have to take more of it,
right?
Like 5 or 6 grams a day, where phenylpiracetam you might want to take 100 milligrams a day.
Right.
But they are perfectly safe, and I highly recommend them.
Gotcha. So obviously there's a lot of information. So for the listeners and viewers, they're thinking, wow, there's a lot going on here. It's not something that you're going to learn in a 50-minute video or podcast. I mean, one's going to really have to study this, learn about it, listen to podcasts, watch your YouTube videos as well. Where can they reach? What is your YouTube channel? How can they find you? What's your website? And how can they, study more of the knowledge that you've gained over the years?
The easiest thing to do is to go to nootropicsexpert.com.
Okay.
That's nootropicsexpert.com, or go to the YouTube channel, which is also Nootropics Expert. I've also written 2 books. One is a free download. If you go to Nootropics Expert and you just opt in, you subscribe, give me your email address, and I'll send you a free copy of Secrets of the Optimized Brain, which is, that's around 80 pages. And it's just packed with, I think, 72 different dietary supplements that will help your brain. It explains what it is, what it does, and how much you should take, and interactions to watch out for. And my other book is the big one, Head First, The Complete Guide to Healing and Optimizing Your Brain with Nootropic Supplements. That's nearly 600 pages.
Wow.
But it's only $37. You can go to nootropicsexpert.com and get yourself a copy. It's not available anywhere else so far, but it's available in 3 different, whatever you use as your reading device, PDF, or you can read it on your iPad or a Nook or whatever it is you read on. And the YouTube channel has got, like 95 videos so far. So if you just go to YouTube and you start typing in nootropics, the search suggestions, YouTube will tell you Nootropics Expert will be right near the top of that. Just click on that.
Yeah, I've watched quite a few of the videos too, and very good information, very detailed, and you cite a lot of evidence and a lot of the studies that support a lot of the information that you provide to the listeners.
Everything that I've written about, Eric, is backed by by clinical studies.
Right.
Each article, each review has got dozens of links to peer-reviewed clinical studies showing that I'm just not making this stuff up.
Right. So even for the medical students out there, the doctors who are listening to this is not something that you just pulled out of your head. Again, these research studies are in PubMed, the Google of sorts for scientists and health professionals. And, I think if anything, we're just kind of being a little bit more proactive and instead of waiting for, big studies to come out and to be published in JAMA and New England Journal, which almost never will be because they're
well, some of them are.
Yeah. Are they? Okay.
Yeah. I've got links through to the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA. a couple of the big publications too
Right.
have studied a lot of this stuff.
Excellent. So yeah, so I think
not just PubMed.
right, but I think definitely there's going to a person's going to have to do their homework, figure out what's best for them in their situation.
Absolutely.
And on your website as well, you break down certain conditions as well, and I believe, right, and then we can figure out which nootropics are best for different for memory, for like we talked about, depression, anxiety, energy, and so on.
And there's a number of different ways to look for it, particularly on the website and in the book. You can just search for the keyword. You can go to the blog tab and just scroll down all the articles I've written. There's 12 and 14, 15-page articles on things like depression and anxiety and learning and memory, PTSD, ADHD, traumatic brain injury. I've written articles on all of that stuff. Or if you are just looking for something specific like OCD, just use the search bar top right of the website and type in obsessive compulsive disorder or whatever it is you're trying to fix, and you'll get a bunch of returns, and then you just have to sift through everything that turned up and find out what's relevant to you.
Great.
But it's easy enough to find whatever you're looking for.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I definitely recommend people get the free download book and then also invest and get the other book as well, which will have all the information that they'll need. All right. Hey, absolutely. Hey, thank you very much for sharing this information with us, and we hope everyone finds it useful. And we'll put the post or the link to your website in the description as well, and hopefully we'll get a lot of people over there so they can learn about all the benefits of nootropics.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Madrid. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.